Welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast, where we bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders and influencers who are making waves and some headway in their callings. Today, we have the privilege of hosting an individual whose life journey embodies resilience, transformation, and the power of second chances. Our guest's path has been anything but ordinary, from experiencing homelessness to becoming a successful business owner and a published author. He's worn many hats, including door-to-door salesman, fire truck driver, minister, building contractor, and a journalist. These diverse experiences have given him what he calls calloused hands and a tender heart, shaping his unique perspective on life and inspiring his work in helping others rebuild their lives after incarceration. Our guest's debut novel, Running as Fast as I Can, has been hailed as a masterpiece, garnering 30 awards, including the American Writing Awards General Fiction winner and Best Book Award for Inspirational Fiction. His story of perseverance, facing 200 rejections before achieving literary success, is as inspiring as the tales he weaves. Get ready for a conversation that promises to be as enlightening as it is inspiring. Now, before I roll that intro, please share this conversation with your friends and networks. I know many people are going to enjoy this conversation. Two other things: if you can give 5 a.m. Podcast a 5-star review on your favorite podcast player, and if you really want to support the show, head over to buymeacoffee.com/5am podcast and drop a few virtual bills in the barrel. Now, let's roll that intro. John Graham, welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast.
Very good to be here, and I'm also glad that it's not 5 a.m. my time.
Yes, it's 5 o'clock a.m. somewhere.
And I'm glad it's somewhere else.
Yeah, I know most people are still studying the backs of their eyelids at 5 a.m., but the early bird gets the worm, as has been said over the generations. And I just sincere welcome for joining me today to talk about your book and your experiences. I wanted to start out with helping people after incarceration. I know that I've had the opportunity to be a volunteer with Corrections Canada in the federal penitentiary system, and boy, if you've never been behind those walls, for me, just as a volunteer, you just cannot understand what that's like. Can you talk about how you wanted this to be like a ministry for you?
I would have to say I didn't plan it.
Okay.
And that's not a benign statement or a dismissive statement.
Mm-hmm.
It's, as you can tell from my resume there, and that really is the polite way of saying it. I had a lot of detours in my life because not that I made mistakes, I just didn't know where to go. And in our culture that likes to view success as a sprint, you hurry out of high school, you hurry through college, you gather all the money, you get the big house, and then you parade around as successful. But some of us don't even know where to start, because either we started behind because of family, because of abuse, because of poverty, or because we simply didn't know. And so I made a lot of detours, and I was 53 years old when most people were talking about retirement. I didn't have anything, but I had traveled town to town, state to state with my construction business, and pulling my family behind me. And finally, my wife and I decided that instead of stopping and saying, I quit, let's retire, I said, let's do something to help people like us who have struggled more than us, so maybe we can make a difference. And so we bought an old house that was 140 years old, scraped together a little bit of money we had, and just used all our sweat equity and remodeled that house. And remodeled it. I said it'd take 3 months, but it was 14 years. So that tells you my optimism.
Yeah.
But we used it as a homeless shelter. And we literally were sharing our house. But then the Department of Correction connected with us and said, we would like to have people who are getting out of prison. They've done their sentence, but they just need a safe place to start over again. And so we partnered with the Department of Correction as
Wow.
a contractor, a shelter or a housing provider. And we started off with one house, then two houses, then three houses. And just today, we made an agreement to buy our 21st house in the whole Western Ohio region. And that's taken 25 years. But we have helped 2,500 men and women with housing and mentoring. So not that we can guarantee success, but we guarantee an opportunity.
Well,
and that's really all we can offer is I'll give you a hand up, but I can't give you a hand out.
Right. Yeah, and the adage of teaching a man to fish instead of providing him a fish. And, congratulations to you, really, or props or points to you for getting to that age where you weren't going to retire, you were going to refire the engines.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Keep on going.
My wife and I, I'm 76. My wife is my age, and she has more energy than I do, but we're always, always looking for something because the minute, we're like sharks, the minute you stop swimming, you drown. So we have to keep moving. But by moving, it's always in a positive direction.
Yeah.
And that way you don't watch television in the afternoon. You go out and
that's right.
Fix something.
Yes. No, actually, just before we were doing this, I had a window of opportunity. I was actually cutting back our grapevines, getting ready for spring. So it's like you got to keep on moving. And I want to ask you about the diversity in your life story. Was there, or could you take us back to a pivotal moment that led you to founding Good Samaritan Home?
I would say pivotal. It's almost embarrassing. I had tried my hand at being a minister, thinking that I could help people. And what I found was being a minister in today's church, I'll be polite, it can be political. And you can get, particularly today, you can get caught between the left and the right. And no matter where you go, you're going to alienate somebody. Having been trained in construction as a contractor, my philosophy was, if you want something to fit, you get a big hammer.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in the church, that didn't do well.
Right.
So I didn't do well as a pastor. And at 53, we were about to lose our job and our housing, the church house.
Yeah.
So we were facing, as a family, homelessness. That's when we said, instead of being the victim, instead of complaining, whether it's fair or not, it doesn't matter. They made the best decision for them. And now what's the best decision for us? We're going to turn this from lemons to lemonade. We're going to turn it around. And that's when we said we're going to give back to help somebody who's struggling more than us.
Yeah.
And I found a whole world out there struggling.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is a great area of ministry. Just a couple weeks ago, I had Shane Jenkins on, who is he was a J6er. Now, he had a life of crime before he met the Lord, and he certainly wasn't expecting to be incarcerated in the federal system. And he was talking about, he thought the jails in Texas were bad during his younger years of crime and punishment. He said, you can have no idea how hard it is to survive in the federal system in the United States. And so do you have some things that you learned along the way of what these men and women who come out of a completely different world than the rest of us, and what opened, or was there an event that maybe opened your eyes to, wow, these people actually do need our help?
Not necessarily a single event, but the consistent story I hear. My wife has a habit of asking personal questions just in a conversational way. And she'll say, tell me about your mother. Tell me about your father.
Wow.
Tell me about your grandmother. And invariably, there is no father. He's either gone or never was there. Mother is, if she's good, is working 2 jobs to provide for us and gone all the time. But probably she was the main reason that you started dealing, because she was your dealer.
Yeah.
And together, I had a guy tell me today that about how many times he had a gun pointed at him, mostly from his mother. And so, and then grandma seems to be the only anchor in many lives. But when drugs entered the picture, everything changed.
Yeah.
And so what I found is that many, many people coming to us, we're not rehabilitating, we're habilitating. They've never had the basic tools of what it means to even be in a safe place.
Yeah.
And so we don't have programming as such. basically I'd say we listen. Just let people get a voice to express themselves, to be seen as real people.
Yeah.
I'll
Right.
give you a perfect example.
Sure.
Today I got a call from a man named Rolandus. He had gone through some training classes that the county provided to help him get a job, and he couldn't get a job. And he tried 13 different applications and couldn't get hired. And he was very, very frustrated. And today he called and he said, I just got hired as a forklift driver. And his lip was quivering and he was wanting to cry. And he was so proud of himself.
Wow.
And that, I think, is his first job. And he
Amazing.
is probably 40 years old.
Is that right? One of the things that I realized from my time as a volunteer with Corrections Canada in the federal system was there's people who have been out of society, haven't been to a restaurant in 15, 20 years, haven't been to a movie theater 15, 20 years, haven't shopped for groceries maybe ever in their life. Can you just talk maybe another success story of someone who has come out and then been habilitated, as you say? I really like that word. That's a good word. Habilitated.
Probably the one example I think of off the top of my head again and again is Jimmy. Jimmy was schizophrenic. If he took his meds, he was fine. But if he didn't, he thought he was James Bond on one day and Jesus Christ on the other. And in fact, he thought he could fly one day and took a header out of a window. And it was mental illness. And he had been in and out of the prison system. And he was so not incorrigible, just so unmanageable that even the mental health office banned him from their offices.
Wow.
And they found him in the middle of winter in his truck. The truck had broken down. He was freezing to death. They took him to the VA hospital because he had been a veteran, and they called us and said, can you help him with housing? We will guarantee his medication. And we took Jimmy in and gave him a stable place for a week, 2 weeks, a month, a year. And when he died in our house after 14 years, he said just before he died, this was the only home I ever had.
Wow.
Now that to me is the essence of it. And Jimmy was a throwaway among throwaways.
Wow.
And truth was, he was a nice guy, but his father had abused him. And then you see the pattern again and again.
Right. Yeah. The pattern replays. Unfortunately, it's just, it's actually a good example of why we need to be good to the children in our community and help them. A lot of times we don't even know, I guess, what the problem is. But I guess it's listening to that still small voice of the Lord to see who you can help and impact. When you were saying that, so you have 22, is it 22 homes now in Western
functioning
Ohio?
homes right now, we have 19, but we just bought 2 more.
Right. So did you, in the start of all this, did you face community resistance when you started housing individuals? I'm sure you've got some great stories about that.
Buckle up.
Okay.
When I started, in my innocence, I thought, this is a wonderful thing. The community needs to be involved so they can support this for their benefit.
Right.
And in fact, I had done my research for my doctoral studies on the community benefits to reentry programming. And my research after 10 years showed that the community benefits by helping people coming out of prison as much as those do coming into the community.
Wow.
So I thought, this is great. So the newspaper interviewed me, and I thought, we're going to get people coming by to ask to volunteer. Well, what we got were petitions to the city council, letters to the editor. We got threats. We've got ordinances passed at City Hall, lawsuits filed. I had police protection at one point.
Wow.
And it took us 3 lawsuits and 7 years to finally clear the air.
Wow.
But what it took was not the courts. What it took was, number one, in the winter when the snow would come, we would make a point of not just cleaning our sidewalk, but cleaning the entire block. And we cleaned up our house, made it the quietest on the block. And we made a point of being a good neighbor without saying a word.
Wow.
And, I call it snowblower conversation, where you let your feet do the talking.
Yeah.
And eventually, those critics who used to wave at us with one finger
Yeah.
now use all their fingers.
Right.
So not that we won over everybody,
Uh-huh.
but I guess it's hard to be mad at somebody who's not mad back at you.
Right.
And we would refuse to give in to that. And there are days when it was very, very difficult. But I'll be candid with you.
Yes.
Things are very, very clear also when you're under the gun, literally,
Yeah.
because all the pretenses are gone, and all you can see is, why am I here? This is for this ministry. This is for this purpose.
Yeah.
And you can see very clearly, I believe. I did,
Yeah.
at least.
Well, that reminds me of chess. I'm not a very good chess player. I don't play it a lot. And I have some family members that are very good at playing chess. And there's one thing that I have taken away from all my losses, my lack of success in chess. And that is the moment I react and respond to the actions of my adversary, I've lost the game.
Yep.
And if I keep going with my plan, I'm going to win. So I just want to shift focus a little bit to your novel, Running as Fast as I Can. It's been described as everyone's story. Why do you think it resonates with so many people?
I consistently watching the reader reviews, and again, what I hear is, I couldn't stop reading. I saw myself, Daniel Robinson, the main character, said, I saw me in Daniel. And because Daniel comes from a home in poverty in the 60s. So he travels through all the issues, the conflicts of the 60s, like Forrest Gump did.
Right.
But he comes from abuse, and even in his church, his pastor abuses him. Wow. So Daniel's reeling on every side, and he's looking for some sort of family. And so I call it a limp. He was broken at birth, so he couldn't walk, not without a limp. And he had to learn to lean on people who often had their own limps.
Yeah.
And when the two people come together and lean on one another, they can walk straight. And that's the idea. What I found, Michael, was that I would go to the city council and talk to people, and I present the data. And I'd say, here's the documentation that rehabilitation works or reentry works. And nobody listened. So what I decided to do was, how do I tell the story about reentry? Tell a second chance story so people will read it. And that's where this book, Running as Fast as I Came from. It's a story of somebody that seems real. In fact, somebody said to me in a review, I thought it was real. I didn't know it was fiction until I got halfway through it.
Wow.
And I want people to not just identify with it, but I want them to feel Daniel's emotions.
Yeah. Right.
And that's what I'm finding they are.
Yeah. So you talk a lot about the value of adversity. And I guess you probably see that in the people who come to your homes. Can you talk a little bit about if there's someone, maybe they're listening and they've just been really beaten down and they feel their whole life is just adverse against them? How do they start to take that one step in front of the other?
You just answered it. You take one step in front of the other. I compare it to life being a marathon. You like to think it's a sprint, and only the fast and the healthy and what I call the hard bodies can win the race. The gifted people who can do everything at a young age. But you and I are born with a limp, and we fall down many times. Just get up. And let's suppose it takes you until you're 53 to find where you fit.
Yeah.
I've been doing this for 21 years.
Wow.
And so obviously the men we've helped have benefited from my late start.
Yeah.
We just never know where God is going to open doors, but we have got to literally go in and knock on that door.
Yeah. And when I was reading about the door-to-door salesman, that's very intimidating. There's probably a lot of people that couldn't take those steps up towards that stranger's door. So experiencing rejection, just like in the top I was talking about, you had experienced 200 rejections on your book, and you went on to win 30 awards. So what kept you motivated to embrace those rejections?
The first draft of my story, my novel, took 3 years. I just got the passion out there.
Yeah.
And then I sent it out to an agent thinking he's going to write back and he's going to say, I love your work. You're going to make a New York Times bestseller list. and all I heard were crickets. And so I sent it out again, and somebody would say, it's too long, it drags on, it's too flat. So I would rewrite it.
Wow.
And then I would send it out and rewrite it. And it got to the point where I didn't even notice the rejections. They were so common. It was, and the reason is, and it's actually a valid reason. There are 1 million books published every year, and many of them are quite good, but the market is absolutely saturated. And the idea that is, let's suppose you have a book that's handled by Harcourt Brace, a major publisher, and the average book that's published by mainstream press sells less than 250 copies in a given year.
Wow.
They don't make money. So why should they invest in somebody like me, an outsider, who wrote a story about an outsider that nobody has ever heard of?
Yeah.
So it was rejected. But I worked and worked and worked through 24 editions again and again, and I hired an editor, just a young kid who knew nothing about life, but he knew how to write.
Wow.
And he taught me how to put the emotions that I had been bottling up and not knowing how to express because of my training as a journalist. He taught me to let them go. Wow. And so I brought all these emotions out on paper, and suddenly it just burst out, and the story was exactly what I wanted it to be. And that's where the awards came from.
Wow. And so that's definitely a metaphor for your ministry with it's Good Samaritan Homes, correct?
Home with no S.
Oh, okay. So how do you get into that depth with the people that come and stay in your homes? They obviously have to persevere as well, and they've had a lot of rejection.
I think there's a tendency, particularly in the church, to say, here's what you need. We have our scorecard. I talked to 7 people today about the Lord, or I invited 7 people to church today. And I have found that the less I say, the more I'm heard. So the best example was one day I walked on a Saturday up to one of our houses and sat on the porch and just listened to the guys talking. And I'd say, tell me about your kids, because they all had kids and they're all worried about them. Tell me about your mama. Tell me what your dreams are. I just listened. At the end of the morning, they thought that I was the wisest man they'd ever heard. Well, and I didn't say anything.
That's good. I've heard it said, I think it was Keith Moore that I heard it from, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth.
For a reason.
Yes, for a reason, that's for sure. So one of the things that you had touched on earlier, and your character in the book goes through the upheaval of the 60s. How did that experience for you shape what you do now?
I was in college, so I was removed. I was too young for the civil rights protests, and the Vietnam War protests were just raging when I was in college, but we were separated from it until I was accepted in the Air Force, and I was going to be in the officers candidate school until Kent State.
Wow.
And ironically, on that very day, I had stumbled onto a protest on the Ohio State campus, and the National Guard had surrounded us. We knew about the 4 students killed, and the guards surrounded us with their guns. And I thought, this is it. Our country's coming apart, and I'm going to die right here and now. At the end of that day, we didn't die, but I never looked back. And it took me 35 years. I never joined the Air Force, but it took me 35 years to vote because I totally lost faith in the structure of the government that I knew or that I saw. And so that's why now, not that I'm making amends, but I'm trying to re-enter the society and maybe help what I feel to be the weak points. And the truth is, I see today very much like 1968 with the anger, the violence, the threats. The people feel outcast. They feel like they're not heard. So maybe I can speak to today because of having lived through this before.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit about even how your career and your work, you sound almost like you were being prepared to this, to when you would hit 53. You're being prepared through the different, what maybe seemed like weaves and the course of a river, perhaps. Did you have in mind that this was all going to add up to be able to help others in some way?
No, No, I'd like to say that I saw beyond the difficulty, but I didn't. In fact, when we were facing all these lawsuits, I had no idea how we're going to get through it. Here's the only thing I knew, Michael, was that I was not going to quit.
Right.
Because I made a commitment to do what was right. And it's not, I won't dignify it by saying it was a Damascus Road commitment.
Yeah, right.
I made a commitment to offer somebody more help than I got.
Wow.
And I chose the least of these, the ones that society had no time for.
Yeah.
And not that I wanted to choose them. I guess it was nobody else was willing, and I was the last man standing. So
yes.
I felt like I was at the Alamo.
Yeah.
I was the only one there, so I may as well fight.
Yes. Yeah, I had heard that from somebody else once, just talking about their road to success. They felt like they were the last person to be asked. They were the first one that said yes. I'm at the end of the line, but dagnam, and I'm going to say yes when my chance comes. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, though, if you could elaborate on your philosophy of developing the calloused hands and the tender heart. How do you apply that to your work?
When you fail enough times, when you fall down enough times, and I think the rejections were part of it, is that they were capstones. I don't think I could have handled the rejections if I hadn't been through so many vocational or career rejections. Not that I did things wrong, I just never fit into them, and I made wrong choices. I have great respect for somebody who takes a job and stays with it. Like my children have stayed in their own jobs for 25 years. Wow. And they stayed in the same house, and they are stable. And I take some degree of credit with that, is I gave them an example of what not to do.
Yeah, right.
And so they've become what the more of the American norm. And on the upside, though, they wouldn't be there if I hadn't made my mistakes preparing. True. So I would say that if they were to lose their job right now, it would be devastating for them because they're ill-equipped for that sort of failure. Take, for example, the federal workers in Washington right now who are getting notices without warning that their job, their company, their lives have been eliminated. I'm sure there are many contemplating suicide because they have no idea what to do.
Yeah.
But I have been through that so many times that I would simply say, and I have said it, there's a back door somewhere, and I will find a way to get around this. And we have. That's where the publishing came from. I created Don Quixote Press as an independent publisher because I knew exactly what I wanted it to be and how to do it. I did have a publisher willing to help me, but she was going to do it her way.
Yeah.
And I knew that would not work.
Right.
So it takes failure, I believe, to give you the strength and the perspective to succeed through the hard times.
Yeah, that's right. And I think you have a phrase, the second chance conversations.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you explain that concept and why you believe it's so important?
Well, the idea is we have a tendency to say, particularly in the internet, in first grade, I saw you do this, I've got a picture of you. Or girls in particular, if you post a picture through your boyfriend that's inappropriate, that picture follows you forever, and you are forever that picture. And there are girls who commit suicide over one mistake.
Yeah.
And so what we tell people again and again is that it's all in pencil. You can get a second chance. And that theme comes through the book again and again and again. One of the awards that I won was the most quotable book. And that was one of the phrases was, life is written in pencil. We get a lot of second chances.
Yeah. Wow.
And I believe that because if I didn't have it myself, I never would have gotten the callous hands came with the falls, but the tender heart came with forgiving myself.
Right. Wow, that's a big one, forgiving ourselves. That's more than just a chapter in a book, that's for sure. But
that's right.
John, I want to ask, how can our viewers and listeners connect with you?
My website is johndavidgraham.com. Very simple.
Okay.
Check it out because it'll link you to the book. You can read about the book. You can even download several free chapters.
Nice.
I'm not looking for donations and such to support us. What I'm looking for are conversations.
Yeah.
I would like people to read the book and then apply that to their neighborhood. And then they can reach me from that website. They can look up Good Samaritan Home there too because it links. But you can reach me with questions, and I've had people contact me, and I'd be glad to talk to anybody.
Yeah, that's great. So looking ahead, What's next for John Graham?
Well, the publishing was just absolutely time consuming, but it got me into the social media world. I learned to speak TikTok. I'm all over this. I've learned to do 30-second videos
Nice.
without one single dancing cat.
Well, good.
But I try to say something meaningful in a very short time. And I end up doing what they call Substack articles. And I can have meaningful discussions over, say, 500 or 1,000 words. And what it does is, particularly today, it's today's age of fear and anxiety. I try to offer this message that we'll get through this.
Yeah.
So if people will discuss second chances, if they'll just give second chances, give themselves a second chance, then that's exactly why I wrote the book.
Right.
And I will tell you that I've started the sequel.
Oh, good. Good. Well, we'll have to have you on again. I hate to cut things short. We've had such a great conversation. There's so many other roads we could diverge on together, but we'll have to save that for another time. John, thank you.
Anytime.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us on 5 a.m. Podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. I really enjoyed this. Thank you, Michael.
Good. Well, it was a delight. And as we wrap up our conversation, I would like to encourage our listeners to explore John's work further. He doesn't have just the website. He's got his TikTok. He's got his Substack. So please connect with him and learn maybe how to take those steps after forgiving oneself, because that is a tough nut to crack for so many of us. You can purchase his award-winning novel, Running as Fast as I Can, on Amazon, but just go to his website. You'll find all the information that you need there, and just to learn from John and his family's experiences. Now, to our listeners and our viewers, a sincere thanks from us here at 5 a.m. Podcast for listening in and sharing this conversation. Sometimes I get the idea, like I do, if you're in a diner, in a booth, of course you're going to eavesdrop on the people behind you. That's kind of my vision for 5 a.m. Podcast and doing these conversations, is that you're just listening in, and it's great. Feel free to tap us on the shoulder, because we would love to include you in the conversation. Now, if you haven't already and you want to help us grow 5 a.m. Podcast, give us a like, a subscribe, and absolutely share this with your friends. I am sure that a name has popped into your head at least once in our conversation. I should share this with Ruth or Jimmy. So if you feel the urge to share, please do. And then after you've done that, if you could come back and give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast player, we would love that. And then, of course, we have our buymeacoffee.com/5am podcast. If you would like to be so kind as to throw a few bucks in the barrel, and that would be a delight. Now, until next time, we thank you for your support. We ask that you go out and seize your day, walk in God's blessings for you, and enjoy those sunrises and sunsets. I'm Michael Clausen.